When a Comanche widow discovered a desperate white father and his starving children on the Texas frontier in 1867, she faced an impossible choice that would either unite two warring worlds or destroy them both. What she did next became the most talked about alliance in the American West, but would her shocking decision save the family she'd grown to love, or make them all targets for those who profited from keeping the races divided? The gunshot that split the morning air wasn't meant for killing, it was meant for eating. Ayanna Crowfeather lowered her rifle and watched the big deer stumble forward 3 steps before collapsing near a cluster of prickly pear cactus. Steam rose from the animal's body in the cool Texas dawn, mixing with her own breath as she exhaled slowly. She had been tracking this buck since the stars began to fade. Now, as the sun painted the endless grassland gold and orange, she felt the familiar mix of gratitude and sadness that came with taking a life to preserve her own. Her grandmother had taught her to whisper thanks to every creature that fed her. Some habits died hard, even when you lived alone. The year was 1867, and the Texas Panhandle stretched out around her like a vast ocean of grass and sky. Most folks called this country empty, but Ayanna knew better. Every rock and tree and hidden spring told a story if you knew how to listen. Right now, the story being told was one of change white settlers pushing west, her own people being pushed back, and her caught somewhere in the middle like a leaf spinning between 2 strong winds. Her horse, a sturdy paint mare named Whisper, stood patient as stone while Ayanna approached the fallen deer. The animal was larger than she'd expected, easily enough meat to last her through the next moon, maybe longer if she dried it properly. But as she knelt to begin the work of field dressing, something made her pause. Smoke, thin and gray, rising from somewhere beyond the low hills to the east. Ayanna straightened, her hand instinctively moving to the bone-handled knife at her belt. In 3 years of wandering this country alone, she'd learned that smoke usually meant trouble. Sometimes it was buffalo hunters making camp. Sometimes it was soldiers. Sometimes it was her own people. And even that could be dangerous for a woman who no longer quite belonged to any world. The smart thing would be to ignore the smoke, finish her work, and move on. She had supplies to last another week, and there were plenty of places to make camp where no one would find her. But something about that thin column of smoke nagged at her like a thorn in her moccasin. Maybe it was the way it rose, so straight and steady, like whoever made it wasn't trying to hide. Or maybe it was something elsey feeling she couldn't name that made her chest feel tight and her hands restless. She left the deer where it had fallen and mounted Whisper. The smoke wasn't far, maybe a mile over the ridge. She could investigate and be back before the sun climbed much higher. If there was danger, she'd know it long before anyone saw her. The ride took her through country she'd traveled before, rolling hills covered in buffalo grass and dotted with mesquite trees whose thorns could tear a man's clothes to ribbons. Jackrabbits bounded away from Whisper's hooves, and once she saw a roadrunner dart between the bushes, chasing some unlucky lizard. As she climbed the ridge, the smoke grew thicker, not the black, oily smoke of a grass fire, but the gray-white smoke of seasoned wood burning clean. Someone knew what they were doing with that fire, which made her both more curious and more careful. At the top of the ridge, she dismounted and crept forward on foot, staying low among the scattered rocks. What she saw in the valley below made her forget all about being careful. A small cabin sat beside a creek that probably ran year-round. Vegetable garden plots, brown and withered now in late fall, stretched behind the house. A well with a wooden windlass stood near the front door. Chicken coops, a small barn, a corral for horses. Someone had built a real homestead here, the kind meant to last generations. But it was the people that caught her attention. A man knelt in the dirt beside what looked like a fresh grave marked with river stones arranged in a neat rectangle. His shoulders shook as he bent forward, and even from her hiding place on the ridge, Ayanna could hear the sound of his crying carried on the wind. 2 children sat on the cabin's front step. A girl with tangled brown hair who looked maybe 10 years old held a little boy on her lap. The boy couldn't be more than 3, and he kept reaching up to touch his sister's face like he was trying to understand why she looked so sad. All 3 of them looked like they hadn't eaten a good meal in weeks. Their clothes hung loose, and even the man's broad shoulders seemed shrunken, like grief and hunger were eating him from the inside out. Ayanna had seen enough death to recognize its aftermath. Someone important to this family was buried under those stones, and from the looks of things, that someone had been the one who knew how to keep them all fed and healthy. She should leave. This wasn't her business, and getting involved with white settlers was a good way to end up dead or worse. Her own people would call her foolish for even considering it. The whites would probably shoot her on sight if they saw her. But as she watched, the little boy slipped off his sister's lap and toddled toward the well. His sister jumped up to follow him, but she moved slowly, like someone who hadn't eaten enough to keep her strength up. The boy reached the well and tried to work the windlass, but he was too small and weak to manage it. "I thirsty, Emma," Ayanna heard him say, his voice carrying clearly in the still air. The girl, Emma, wrapped her arms around her little brother and tried to lift him high enough to reach the water bucket, but she stumbled and nearly dropped him. Her father looked up from his grieving at the sound, saw his children struggling, and the look that crossed his face was one Ayanna recognized. It was the look of someone drowning who could see the surface but couldn't reach it. The man got to his feet and walked over to help his children, but his movements were clumsy and uncertain. When he tried to work the windlass, his hands shook so badly he could barely grip the rope. He managed to bring up the bucket, but water slopped over the sides as he carried it to his son. That's when Ayanna noticed something else. The deer she'd been tracking, the big buck she'd shot that morning, wasn't the only one that had been hit. There, lying in the tall grass near the family's well, was another deer, smaller than hers, but still plenty of meat for people who needed it. This deer was still alive, but just barely. She could see its sides heaving as it struggled to breathe. Someone had wounded it, probably with a poor shot, and it had run here to die slowly and painfully. The family hadn't noticed it yet, too caught up in their own troubles to see the gift that was dying just yards from their home. Ayanna made her decision without really thinking about it. Later, she would wonder what made her do such a foolish thing. Maybe it was the sound of the little boy asking for water. Maybe it was the way the father's hands shook when he tried to help his children. Or maybe it was something her grandmother had told her long ago about how the spirits sometimes put us exactly where we need to be, even when we don't understand why. She stood up from her hiding place among the rocks and began walking down the hill toward the cabin, leading Whisper behind her. She moved slowly and kept her hands visible, her rifle slung across her back in a way that showed she wasn't planning to use it. The girl saw her first. Emma's eyes went wide, and she grabbed her little brother's hand, pulling him closer to their father. The man looked up, and Ayanna saw him take in her appearance the buckskin dress with its intricate beadwork, the long black braids, the way she moved like someone who belonged to this land in a way he never would. His face went through several expressions quickly: surprise, fear, confusion, and finally something that might have been resignation, like he was too tired and grieved and hungry to care what happened next. "Stay behind me, children," he said quietly, but he didn't reach for any weapon. Maybe he didn't have one close by, or maybe he was just too worn down to fight. Ayanna stopped about 20 feet away, close enough to talk but far enough to run if she needed to. She pointed toward the wounded deer near their well. "Your meat dies slowly," she said in English, keeping her voice calm and low. "I can help it die quickly." The man looked where she was pointing and seemed to notice the deer for the first time. His mouth opened slightly, like he couldn't quite believe what he was seeing. That's not ours," he said after a moment. "It is now," Ayanna replied. "Your children need food. This animal needs peace. Both problems have same answer." The little boy broke away from his sister before anyone could stop him. Benjamin, that's what Emma called him as she lunged forward, ran straight toward Ayanna with the fearless curiosity that only very young children possess. He stopped just out of arm's reach and tilted his head back to look up at her. "You pretty?" he announced, as if commenting on the weather. Emma caught up to her brother and tried to pull him back, but Benjamin wiggled out of her grip. "Horse pretty too," he added, reaching one small hand toward Whisper's velvet nose. The mare lowered her head and snuffled gently at the boy's palm, her dark eyes soft and patient. Benjamin giggled, the first happy sound Ayanna had heard from any of them. Benjamin, no. The father moved forward quickly, but stopped when Ayanna raised one hand. The child speaks truth, she said. Animals know hearts. Would my horse allow him close if I brought danger? The man, she could see now that he was younger than his weathered face suggested. Maybe 30 years old, studied her with the careful attention of someone who'd learned that mistakes could be deadly. His clothes were clean but patched in several places. His hands showed the calluses of hard work, but also cuts and scrapes that came from someone doing unfamiliar tasks without the right tools or knowledge. I'm Jacob Morrison, he said finally. These are my children, Emma and Benjamin. I am called Ayanna. She didn't offer her Comanche name. Most white people couldn't pronounce it properly, and some took offense at being told names they couldn't repeat. What do you want? Jacob asked, but there was less suspicion in his voice now. Benjamin was still petting Whisper, and the horse was clearly enjoying the attention. Instead of answering directly, Ayanna walked over to the wounded deer. It had stopped struggling and lay panting in the grass, dark eyes glazed with pain and approaching death. She drew her niffy, a beautiful blade her husband had made, with a handle carved from elk antler, and knelt beside the animal. Don't look, she told the children softly, and Emma immediately turned Benjamin's face away. One quick cut across the throat, and the deer's suffering ended. Ayanna whispered a brief prayer in her own language, thanking the animal's spirit for the gift of its meat. Why? Jacob asked as she cleaned her knife on the grass. Why help us? Ayanna was quiet for a moment, remembering another grave beside another cabin. This one, burned to ash 3 winters past. Her husband buried beneath stones, very much like the ones that marked this family's loss. Loss speaks to loss, she said simply. She spent the rest of the morning showing them how to properly dress the deer. Emma proved to have quick hands and a strong stomach, learning to separate hide from meat without wasting either. Benjamin was too young to help much, but he stayed close, asking endless questions about everything Ayanna did. Why you cut there? What that for? Can I touch? Jacob worked beside them, following Ayanna's instructions with the concentration of someone who knew this knowledge might mean the difference between his children living or dying. When she showed him how to build a proper smoking rack from green branches, he watched every movement of her hands. My wife knew these things, he said quietly while Emma played with Benjamin near the cabin. She grew up on a farm back in Missouri. I was just a store clerk before we came west. What brought you here? Ayanna asked, as she arranged thin strips of venison on the wooden frame. Jacob's face darkened. Promise of cheap land. Fellow in Kansas City had papers, said this valley was perfect for farming. Good water, rich soil, no trouble with Indians. He glanced at her apologetically. No offense meant. None taken. He lied about the Indians? He lied about everything. Turns out the land wasn't properly surveyed. No clear title. And there's a man named Tom Brewster who seems to think he owns everything from here to the Canadian River. Ayanna had heard of Brewster, a man who collected land like some people collected scalps, and wasn't particular about his methods for acquiring either. This Brewster, he make trouble for you? He's been persistent, keeps making offers to buy us out, but the price gets lower every time. Says we'll never make it through winter, especially now that. He gestured toward the grave. Your wife, she died recently? 3 weeks ago. Fever took her fast. One day she was laughing with the children. Next day she could barely lift her head. His voice cracked slightly. I don't know how to do this without her. She was the one who knew about preserving food, tending the garden, keeping us all healthy. I can barely manage to get water from the well without spilling half of it. Ayanna looked around the homestead with new understanding. The withered garden, the patched clothes, the way all 3 of them moved, like people who'd forgotten what it felt like to be truly comfortable, it all made sense now. Your wife, she teach the children these skills? She was starting to. Emma knows some cooking, but nothing like what we need to survive out here. He watched his daughter chase a butterfly while Benjamin clapped his hands. They're so young. They shouldn't have to worry about whether there'll be food tomorrow. As if summoned by his words, a dust cloud appeared on the eastern horizon. Multiple riders, moving fast and heading straight for the homestead. Jacob saw them at the same time Ayanna did. His face went pale, and he called sharply to his children. "Emma, bring Benjamin inside now!" But Emma had spotted the riders too, and instead of running to the cabin, she ran to her father. Benjamin toddled after her, sensing the fear in the adults around him. "Who is it, Papa?" Emma asked, her voice small and tight. "I'm not sure, sweetheart, but I want you and Benjamin to go in the house until they leave." Ayanna studied the approaching riders with experienced eyes. 6 men, riding hard but not scattered like they were chasing something. This was deliberate, organized. The kind of approach that meant business, and probably not the good kind. "Brewster?" she asked Jacob quietly. "Most likely." His hands were shaking again, but this time from fear instead of grief. "You have weapons?" "An old shotgun. Haven't fired it in months." "Get it. But don't show it unless I tell you." Emma was tugging at her father's shirt. "Papa, I'm scared." Jacob knelt down and hugged both his children. "It's going to be all right. Just go inside and stay away from the windows." "I want to stay with you," Emma said, her chin jutting out with sudden stubbornness. "Emma." "The girl has courage," Ayanna interrupted. "Sometimes that is more useful than hiding." Jacob looked like he wanted to argue, but the riders were close enough now that individual faces could be made out. The man in the lead was broad-shouldered and thick around the middle, with pale eyes that seemed to take in everything without giving anything back. "Tom Brewster," Jacob confirmed quietly. "Take the children to the porch," Ayanna said. "Stay close to the door. If trouble starts, get them inside fast." "What are you going to do?" Ayanna adjusted the rifle slung across her back, making sure it could be reached quickly if needed. "What I came here to do. Help your family survive." The riders slowed as they approached the yard, spreading out slightly in a way that looked casual, but would make it hard for anyone to run. Brewster reined in his horse about 20 feet from the cabin, his pale eyes taking in the smoking meat, the blood-stained ground where they'd dressed the deer, and most especially Ayanna herself. "Well, well, Morrison," Brewster called out, not bothering to dismount. "Looks like you've found yourself some interesting company." Jacob stepped forward, placing himself between the riders and his children, but Ayanna could see the way his hands trembled. "Afternoon, Mr. Brewster. What brings you out this way?" "Oh, just checking on my neighbors, making sure everyone's getting along all right." Brewster's gaze lingered on Ayanna with the kind of look that made her skin crawl. "Though I have to say, I'm a bit surprised by the kind of help you're accepting these days. She's been very kind to my family." "I'm sure she has." Brewster finally dismounted, and his men followed suit. "But you know, Morrison, some folks might find this kind of association troubling, especially given recent troubles we've had with hostile Indians in the area." Ayanna felt her jaw tighten, but she kept her expression neutral. She'd heard this song before, the way men like Brewster used fear and prejudice as weapons sharper than any knife. "There haven't been any Indian troubles around here," Jacob said, but his voice lacked conviction. "Well, now that depends on how you define trouble, doesn't it?" Brewster walked closer, and Ayanna noticed how his hand rested casually on the butt of his pistol. "I hear tell there's been livestock missing from ranches to the south, horses disappearing in the night. Could be coincidence, but then again." He let the implication hang in the air like smoke from a bad fire. "Ayanna hasn't taken anything," Emma said suddenly, stepping out from behind her father. "She brought us food." Brewster's attention shifted to the little girl, and something cold moved behind his pale eyes. "Is that so, child? And how exactly did she come by this food?" "She shot a deer," Benjamin piped up proudly. "Big deer, and she made it stop hurting." "Shot a deer, did she?" Brewster looked back at Ayanna. "With what, might I ask?" Ayanna felt the weight of her rifle across her shoulders like a physical thing. Every man in Brewster's group was armed, and they outnumbered her 6-1. But she'd been in worse situations, and she'd learned long ago that showing fear was the fastest way to invite attack. "With skill," she said calmly. One of Brewster's men snickered, but Brewster himself didn't smile. "Mighty convenient. Finding game right here on Morrison's land. Almost like someone was hunting specifically in this area." The implication was clear that she'd been scouting the homestead, maybe planning some kind of attack. It was a lie, but lies had a way of becoming truth when enough people repeated them. The deer was wounded, Jacob said, finding his voice again. Dying slowly. She put it out of its misery and helped us preserve the meat. How charitable. Brewster's tone made the words sound dirty, though I wonder what she might expect in return for such generosity. From the porch came a small sound, Benjamin starting to cry. The little boy didn't understand the adult conversation, but he could feel the tension crackling in the air like lightning before a storm. Emma wrapped her arms around her brother and glared at Brewster with all the fierce protectiveness of someone far older than her years. She doesn't want anything. She's nice. Children see things simply, Brewster said, his voice taking on a false kindness that fooled no one. But adults know that nothing in this world comes free. Especially not from, he paused, looking Ayanna up and down again. Well, let's just say from people who might have reasons of their own for being so helpful. Ayanna had heard enough. She stepped forward, not threatening but not backing down either. You have business with this family, or you just come to frighten children? Brewster's fake smile disappeared entirely. I have business with anyone who might be causing problems in my territory. Your territory? That's right. I own most of the land from here to the river, and I'm working on acquiring the rest, including this little spread. He gestured toward the cabin and outbuildings. Been trying to help the Morrison family understand that they'd be happier somewhere else, somewhere more suitable for people with their particular circumstances. Jacob's face flushed red. This is my land. I have papers. Papers can be disputed, especially when there are questions about the original survey or concerns about the current occupant's ability to maintain proper order. Brewster's hand moved closer to his gun. After all, a man who can't protect his own family might not be the best neighbor to have around. The threat was subtle, but unmistakable. And looking at Jacob's pale face and shaking hands, Ayanna realized that Brewster had been working on this family for weeks, wearing them down bit by bit until they were ready to break. But he'd made one mistake. He'd underestimated what a mother wolf would do to protect cubs that weren't even her own. The knife appeared in Ayanna's hand so fast that even she wasn't sure how it got there. One moment, she was standing empty-handed beside Jacob Morrison. The next moment, 8 inches of sharp steel gleamed in the afternoon sun. She hadn't meant to draw either body, had simply reacted when Tom Brewster's hand moved toward his gun. Every horse in the yard shifted nervously. Brewster's men tensed, their own hands dropping to their weapons. The only sounds were Benjamin's quiet sniffling and the whisper of wind through the tall grass. Now that's interesting, Brewster said, his voice carrying a dangerous calm. Indian woman, pulling steel on white men. Some folks might call that an act of war. Some folks might call 6 armed men threatening a family with hungry children an act of cowardice, Ayanna replied, her voice steady as stone. Emma Morrison stepped closer to her father, but her eyes never left Ayanna's face. There was something in the girl's expression, not fear, but fascination, like she was watching someone do something she'd always dreamed of doing herself. Jacob cleared his throat, the sound loud in the tense silence. Maybe we should all just calm down here. No need for anyone to get hurt over a simple conversation. Simple conversation? Brewster laughed, but there was no humor in it. Morrison, your new friend just threatened 6 law-abiding citizens with a weapon. That's assault in any court in Texas. I threatened no one, Ayanna said calmly. I simply became ready to defend myself, if threatened. Same thing. No, very different thing. One of Brewster's men, a lean fellow with a scar across his left cheek, spat tobacco juice into the dirt. Tom, we gonna stand here jawing all day, or we gonna handle this situation? Brewster held up one hand, never taking his eyes off Ayanna. Patience, Clem. Sometimes the best way to handle a situation is to let it handle itself. He began walking in a slow circle around the yard, like a vulture circling something dying. As he moved, his men spread out without appearing to do so, positioning themselves so that no one could run without being caught. You know what I think, Morrison? Brewster continued his lazy circuit. I think you're in over your head here. Lost your wife. Can't manage the farm. Children going hungry. And now you're taking help from people who might not have your best interests at heart. She's done nothing but help us, Jacob said, but his voice cracked slightly. Has she now? And what do you suppose she wants in return? Brewster stopped walking and fixed his pale eyes on Ayanna. What is it you're really after, girl? Information about our defenses? Counting our horses? Planning something for your warrior friends? Ayanna felt anger rise in her chest like heat from a fire, but she kept her voice level. I want nothing but to help this family survive winter. Mighty convenient story. Indian woman, all alone, just happens to find a struggling family and decides to play the good neighbor. You expect us to believe that? Believe what you choose. Truth does not change because of your doubts. Benjamin had stopped crying and was staring at the adults with a wide-eyed confusion of someone too young to understand why everyone sounded so angry. Emma kept one arm around her little brother while watching every move the men made. Papa, Emma whispered, tugging at Jacob's shirt. Why are they being so mean to her? Jacob knelt down and pulled his daughter close. Some people are afraid of things they don't understand, sweetheart. I'm not afraid of her, Emma said loudly enough for everyone to hear. She's nice. She gave us food and showed me how to braid grass, and she talks to Benjamin like he's a real person instead of just a baby. Brewster's attention shifted to the little girl, and something cold moved behind his eyes. Children don't always know what's good for them, do they? Sometimes they need adults to protect them from their own poor judgment. The threat in his words was barely hidden, and Jacob's face went white. He stood up quickly, putting himself between Brewster and his children. That's enough, Jacob said, and for the first time his voice carried real steel. You've said your piece. Now I think it's time for you to leave. Leave? Brewster seemed genuinely amused. Morrison, I don't think you understand the situation here. See, as the largest landowner in this territory, I have certain responsibilities. One of those responsibilities is making sure that dangerous elements don't threaten the safety of decent families. The only dangerous element I see is you, Emma said suddenly, her young voice ringing clear in the afternoon air. Clem, the scarred man, took a step toward the girl. Kid needs to learn some manners. That's when Ayanna moved. She didn't run or jump or make any dramatic gesture. She simply flowed across the space between herself and Clem, like water, finding the fastest path downhill. One moment she was standing beside Jacob. The next, she was directly in front of the scarred man with her knife blade resting against his throat. Touch the child, she said very quietly, and discover how dangerous I truly am. Clem's eyes went wide, and he raised both hands slowly. Easy now. Easy. Brewster's hand was on his gun now, fully drawn but not yet aimed. Let him go. Right now. Tell your man to step back from the family. You're not in a position to make demands, girl. Ayanna pressed the knife blade just hard enough to draw a thin line of blood on Clem's throat. The scarred man made a small choking sound. Neither are you, she said. For several heartbeats, nobody moved. Then Jacob Morrison did something that surprised everyone, including himself. He walked over to the porch, picked up an old double-barreled shotgun that had been leaning against the wall, and calmly pointed it at Brewster's chest. I believe the lady asked you to tell your man to step back, Jacob said, his voice shaking but determined. Brewster stared at him in disbelief. Morrison, you've lost your mind. You're pointing a gun at a peaceful citizen. Peaceful? Jacob laughed, but it wasn't a happy sound. You ride onto my land with 6 armed men, threaten my children, insult my guest, and call it peaceful? Your guest is holding a knife to one of my men. Your man was threatening my daughter. Emma and Benjamin had moved to stand beside their father, Emma holding her brother's hand, while both children stared up at the adults with fascination and fear. This is getting out of hand, one of Brewster's other men muttered. Tom, maybe we should. Shut up, Pete, Brewster snapped. Nobody's backing down from a store clerk and a squaw. The word hit Ayanna like a physical blow, carrying with it all the contempt and hatred she'd encountered from men like Brewster her entire life. But instead of making her angrier, it made her calmer. She'd heard that word before, and she'd survived it every time. My name, she said very clearly, is Ayanna Crowfeather. My husband was 2 Bears Running, war chief of the Nokoni band. My grandmother was Singing Woman, keeper of the winter counts. My people have names and histories and honor stretching back to the beginning of the world. You may call me by my name, or you may call me nothing at all." The silence that followed was different from the angry tension of before. Even Brewster seemed taken aback by the quiet dignity in her words. Jacob cleared his throat. "I think," he said carefully, "that everyone should put their weapons away and try to settle this like civilized people." "Civilized?" Brewster's voice dripped sarcasm. "Morrison, you're harboring a hostile Indian on your property. That's grounds for military intervention." "She's not hostile. She's been nothing but helpful." "Today? What about tomorrow? What about when her warrior friends come looking for her?" "I have no warrior friends," Ayana said quietly. "My husband is 3 winters dead. My people cast me out for marrying outside the band. I belong nowhere and to no one." Something in her voice made even Clem stop struggling against the knife at his throat. There was a loneliness in those words that went deeper than anger or fear. "All the more reason to move along then," Brewster said, but some of the heat had gone out of his voice. "Find somewhere else to practice your charity." "No." The word was simple, but it carried the weight of a mountain. "No?" Brewster raised an eyebrow. "This family needs help. I can provide it. I will stay until they no longer need me." "And if I say you can't?" Ayana looked directly into Brewster's pale eyes. "Then you will learn why my husband's enemies called him 2 bears running. They said I was fiercer than he was." Jacob's hands were shaking on the shotgun, but his voice was steady when he spoke. "She stays. This is my land, and she's my guest." "For now," Brewster said quietly. "But winter's coming, Morrison, and winter in this country kills people who aren't prepared for it. People who don't have the right kind of help when they need it." He gestured to his men, and slowly they began backing toward their horses. Ayana kept her knife at Clem's throat until he was well clear of the family, then stepped away smoothly. "This isn't over," Brewster said as he mounted his horse. "No," Ayana agreed. "It is not." 3 days after Tom Brewster's visit, Emma Morrison discovered she could track a field mouse through grass without making a sound. She found this out by accident while following Ayana through the tall prairie behind the cabin, trying to learn how the Comanche woman seemed to glide across the ground like a ghost. "Feel with your feet before you put weight down," Ayana explained as they knelt beside a clear stream that ran behind the homestead. "Ground speaks if you listen. Soft here means water underneath. Hard there means rock. Springy means animal trail, packed down by many feet." Emma pressed her bare toes into the earth beside the stream bank, feeling how the soil gave way differently in various spots. It was like learning a new language, one written in dirt and stone instead of letters. "Why are you teaching me this?" Emma asked, practicing the careful way Ayana stepped over fallen branches without snapping them. "Your father is good man, but he knows storekeeping, not landkeeping. Your mother knew farming, but not hunting. You must know both to keep your family alive." They were gathering medicinal plants, willow bark for fever, mint for stomach sickness, wild onions that could be dried and stored for winter flavoring. Ayana had been teaching Emma to recognize useful plants for 3 days now, ever since the confrontation with Brewster. "Are you really going to stay all winter?" Emma asked as she carefully dug up wild turnip roots with a sharp stick. "If your father allows it." "He will. He's different since you came. Less scared, I think." That was true, though Ayana wasn't sure if Jacob's increased confidence would help or hurt him when Brewster returned. And Brewster would return men like him always did, usually with more men and worse intentions. Back at the cabin, Jacob was teaching Benjamin to stack kindling properly while keeping one eye on the horizon. He'd been watching for riders constantly since Brewster's visit, jumping at every sound that might be horses approaching. "Papa nervous," Benjamin announced when Emma and Ayana returned with their gathering baskets full. "Papa's being careful," Emma corrected, but she'd noticed it too. Her father startled when doors creaked, when the wind rattled windows, when their old rooster crowed too loudly. That evening, as they shared a meal of venison stew flavored with the wild onions Emma had found, Jacob finally asked the question that had been weighing on him. "What happens when Brewster comes back?" Ayana looked up from her bowl. "You think he will?" "I know he will. He's been trying to buy out every small farmer in this valley for 2 years. The Henderson family, the Williams, old Pete Kowalski, they all sold cheap and moved on rather than fight him. Why this land so important to him? Jacob stood up and walked to the cabin's single window, peering out into the gathering darkness. Railroad's coming. Not this year, maybe not next, but it's coming. When it does, land that's worth 50 cents an acre now will be worth $50 an acre. How you know this? Fellow in town told me. Same fellow who sold me the land papers, matter of fact. Jacob's voice turned bitter. Turns out he was working for Brewster all along, selling questionable titles to families like us, waiting for us to improve the land, then buying us out cheap when we couldn't make it work. Emma looked up from where she was helping Benjamin eat his stew. That's cheating. Yes, sweetheart, it is. But it's the kind of cheating that's hard to prove in court. Ayanna set down her spoon. So Brewster gets land cheap, waits for railroad, sells for much money. That's the idea. Except we didn't sell when he expected us to. Margaret was stubborn about it, said this was going to be our children's inheritance, and she wasn't giving it up for any amount of money. And now, Jacob was quiet for a long moment. Now Margaret's gone. The children are hungry more often than not. I don't know how to preserve enough food for winter. Don't know how to keep them healthy when the cold comes. Every day I think maybe Brewster's right. Maybe we should just take whatever he offers and find somewhere easier to live. But you don't, Ayanna observed. No, because Margaret died for this place. She worked herself sick trying to make it succeed, and when the fever took her, her last words were about the children inheriting this land. His voice cracked slightly. How can I give up the thing she died for? Emma had stopped eating and was listening to every word. Benjamin, too young to understand the adult conversation, was playing with his food and humming a little song. There's something else, Jacob continued. Brewster's not just buying land. He's buying people. Sheriff in town, the territorial judge, half the merchants. Anyone who might cause him problems either gets bought off or run off. What about soldiers? Government men? Nearest army post is a week's ride. By the time they got here, whatever happened would be long over. Jacob turned back to the table. Face it, we're on our own out here. No, Ayanna said quietly. You are not alone. That night, after the children were asleep, Ayanna sat by the dying fire and thought about choices. She could leave. Take her horse and rifle and disappear into the vast country she knew better than any white man ever would. Find her cousin Two Hawks and his band. Try to convince them to let her return despite her marriage to an outsider. Or she could stay and probably die with these people when Brewster decided talking wasn't working fast enough. Neither choice felt right. She was still thinking when she heard horses approaching. Not the thunder of many riders, but the quiet clip-clop of a single horse moving carefully in the darkness. Ayanna moved to the window and peered out. A lone rider was approaching the cabin, but something about the way he sat, his horse seemed familiar. She slipped outside, moving silently, to avoid waking the family. The rider stopped about 50 yards from the cabin and gave a low whistle, the call of a nighthawk, but with a slight variation that made it unmistakably human. Ayanna answered with the same call, and the rider approached. In the moonlight, she could make out a face she hadn't seen in over a year. Cousin, said Two Hawks in their shared language, dismounting and embracing her briefly. You are far from the last place I saw you. Life carries us where it will, she replied, also in Comanche. What brings you here? Word travels fast on the wind. There is talk that Tenatsi is taken up with white settlers. Some of our people are concerned. Ayanna felt her stomach tighten. What kind of concern? The kind that involves young warriors looking to prove themselves by counting coup on enemies of the people. Two Hawks glanced toward the cabin. Is it true? Are you living with them? I am helping them survive. The woman died, left a man who knows nothing of the land, trying to care for 2 small children. And this concerns you how? It was a fair question. By the laws of her people, she owed these strangers nothing. If anything, they were enemies, representatives of the race that had brought disease and war and broken promises. The children do not judge me by my blood, she said finally. The man treats me with respect. They feed me at their table and ask my advice as they would ask a respected aunt. Two Hawks was quiet for a moment. You know this cannot last. When winter comes, they will die or leave. Either way, you will be alone again. Perhaps. And if the young warriors come? If they decide these settlers need to be taught a lesson about harboring enemies of the people? Ayanna looked back at the cabin where Emma and Benjamin slept safely in their beds, probably for the first time since their mother died. Then I will stand between the young warriors and this family. Even if it means fighting your own people? These children are not my enemies. I will not let them be hurt for the crime of showing me kindness. Two Hawks sighed. Cousin, you always were too soft-hearted for your own good. But I understand. I have children too. He remounted his horse but didn't immediately ride away. There is something else you should know. The white men who want this land, they have been talking to some of our people, offering guns and horses to any warriors willing to make trouble for settlers who won't sell. Ayanna felt ice form in her stomach. Brewster? I do not know names, but gold speaks loudly to young men who have little else. How long before they come? Days, maybe a week. The war chief is trying to talk them out of it, but he is old, and they are hungry for glory. After Two Hawks disappeared into the darkness, Ayanna sat on the cabin's front step and watched the stars wheel overhead. Dawn was still hours away, but she knew she wouldn't sleep. Inside the cabin, she could hear Benjamin talking in his sleep, probably dreaming about horses or birds or some other innocent thing that made him smile. Emma sometimes cried out during nightmares, calling for her mother. These people had given her something she'd thought lost forever, a place where she was valued for her skills rather than feared for her blood, where children looked at her with curiosity instead of hatred, where a man asked her opinion and listened to her answers. Now that Sanctuary was about to be destroyed by forces from both worlds, she'd tried to leave behind. But maybe, if she was clever enough and brave enough and very, very lucky, she could find a way to save it. The first step would be convincing Jacob that running away wasn't the answer. The second would be teaching him and Emma to fight like their lives depended on it. Because very soon they would. The war paint was still wet on the young warrior's face when Emma Morrison spotted him crouched behind their chicken coop at dawn. She'd been gathering eggs for breakfast, humming the song Ayanna had taught her about morning birds, when she saw the flash of red and black stripes through the wooden slats. Emma froze, one hand still reaching toward a hen's nest, her heart hammering so loud she was sure the warrior could hear it. The painted man was barely older than a boy, himself maybe 16 or 17, with lean muscles and eyes that burned with the kind of anger that came from having nothing left to lose. He hadn't seen her yet. His attention was focused on the cabin where smoke rose from the chimney, where Papa was probably starting the fire and Ayanna was likely already awake, moving silent as always in the pre-dawn darkness. Emma backed away from the coop step by careful step, the way Ayanna had taught her to move when tracking deer. Don't break sticks. Don't rustle grass. Breathe steady and think calm thoughts, because animals and people could smell fear. She made it halfway to the cabin before the warrior turned and saw her. Their eyes met across 20 yards of morning mist, and Emma saw something in his painted face that surprised her. Not just anger, but pain. The kind of hurt she recognized from looking in mirrors after Mama died. The look of someone who'd lost everything important and didn't know how to stop the world from taking even more. The warrior rose slowly from behind the chicken coop, a bow in his hands with an arrow already fitted to the string. Emma could see other shapes moving in the tall grass beyond their fence, at least 3 more, maybe 4. She should scream, should run, should do something to warn Papa and Ayanna. Instead, she heard herself whisper, "Please don't hurt my family." The painted warrior stopped moving. His dark eyes studied her face, taking in her tangled brown hair and the simple dress Ayanna had helped her mend just yesterday. "You are the child," he said in careful English, "the one who lives with the betrayer." Emma didn't understand the word betrayer, but she understood the tone. Ayanna's not bad. She's helping us. She has forgotten her people. Forgotten her blood. No, she hasn't. She talks about her grandmother all the time, about her husband who died. About the stories your people tell. Emma took a small step forward, ignoring the way the arrow point tracked her movement. She misses them. She's just lonely. Inside the cabin, Benjamin started crying, probably hungry for his morning milk, and wondering where his sister had gone. The sound made the warrior's painted face tighten. "How many in the house?" he asked. "Just my papa and little brother, and Ayana." Emma paused, then added, "Ayana saved us. We were starving, and she brought us food. She's teaching me things Mama never got to teach me. White woman things. No, land things. How to find water. How to read tracks. How to know which plants heal and which ones hurt." Emma's voice grew stronger. "Good things. Things that help people live." More movement in the grass. The other warriors were getting impatient, probably wondering why their scout was taking so long with one small girl. "My name is Burning Sky," the warrior said suddenly. "I am here because the landstealer pays gold for white scalps." Emma's blood went cold. "Mr. Brewster? You know this name? He wants to buy our land cheap. Papa won't sell, so he's been trying to scare us away." Burning Sky's eyes narrowed. "The gold giver said your people stole Comanche hunting grounds. Said you killed women and children." "We didn't kill anybody. We just built a house and tried to grow vegetables. Mama died of fever, not fighting." Emma felt tears start, but she blinked them back. Crying wouldn't help anybody right now. The cabin door opened, and Jacob Morrison stepped onto the porch with his old shotgun in his hands. He saw Emma standing in the yard, talking to a painted warrior, and his face went white as winter snow. "Emma, get away from him." "Papa, don't shoot," Emma called back. "He's just talking." But Jacob was already raising the shotgun, and Burning Sky was drawing back his bowstring, and Emma could see how this was going to end with everyone dead and Benjamin left all alone. That's when Ayana appeared. She didn't come through the door like a normal person. One moment there was empty air beside the cabin, the next moment she was standing there with her rifle in her hands, but pointed at the ground instead of at anyone. "Cousin," she called in Comanche, her voice carrying across the yard clear and strong. "Why do you come to my fire with war paint and weapons?" Burning Sky's bow stayed drawn, but his attention shifted to Ayana. "You are no cousin of mine, betrayer. You sleep in white beds and eat white food and teach white children to think like people." "I teach white children to survive on land. Their ancestors never learned to read. Is this betrayal or mercy?" "It is weakness." Jacob was still pointing his shotgun at Burning Sky, but he was listening to the conversation even though he couldn't understand the words. Emma could see sweat beading on her father's forehead, despite the cool morning air. "Perhaps," Ayana said calmly, "or perhaps it is strength of a different kind. Tell me, young warrior, how many battles have you won? How many coups have you counted?" Burning Sky's painted face flushed darker. "I will count coup today." "On children? On a man who has never raised weapon against the people?" Ayana shook her head. "There is no honor in killing those who cannot fight back. Your grandfather would be ashamed." "My grandfather is dead, killed by blue soldiers while you played house with white farmers." The pain in his voice made Emma's chest hurt. She understood now why his eyes looked so familiar. He was carrying the same grief she'd carried after Mama died, the same desperate anger that made you want to hurt someone, anyone, just to make the pain stop for a while. "I'm sorry," Emma said quietly. Burning Sky's bow trembled slightly. "What?" "I'm sorry soldiers killed your grandfather. That's not fair. He was probably a good person who didn't deserve to die." "Emma, be quiet," Jacob said tightly, but she ignored him. "My mama didn't deserve to die either. Fever took her even though she never hurt anybody. Sometimes bad things just happen to good people, and we can't fix it by hurting other good people." The yard fell silent, except for Benjamin's continued crying from inside the cabin. Burning Sky stared at Emma like she was speaking in a language he'd never heard before. "The child speaks wisdom," called a new voice from the tall grass. An older warrior emerged, his gray hair braided with eagle feathers, and his face painted with different symbols, not the angry red and black of war, but the blue and white of peace talks. "Grandfather Wolf," Ayana breathed. recognizing him. "Granddaughter," the older man replied. "It has been too long since we spoke." Burning Sky looked confused. "But the gold giver said—" "The gold giver says many things. Not all of them are true." Wolf stepped closer, and Emma could see the deep lines around his eyes that came from laughing as much as from worrying. "Lower your bow, nephew. There will be no killing of children today." "But they are whites. Enemies. This child just offered sorrow for your loss. Does this sound like enemy words to you?" Emma watched the conversation bounce back and forth between Comanche and English, trying to follow along. She could tell that Wolf was some kind of chief or elder, someone the younger warriors had to listen to. "What's happening?" Jacob called from the porch. "Peace talk," Ayanna called back. "Put down gun. Show respect." Jacob hesitated, then slowly lowered his shotgun. "If you're sure." "I am sure." Wolf nodded approvingly and continued his conversation with Burning Sky in their own language. Emma caught a few words that Ayanna had taught her: child, honor, grandfather, but most of it was too fast and complex for her to understand. Finally, Burning Sky slowly released the tension on his bowstring and lowered his weapon. The anger was still there in his painted face, but it was mixed with confusion now, and maybe a little shame. "The gold giver lied to us," Wolf said in English, looking directly at Jacob. "He said you murdered Comanche women and children, said you stole sacred burial grounds." "We never hurt anybody," Jacob replied. "This land was sold to us by a man in Kansas City. We thought it was legal. Many things that are legal are not right. Many things that are right are not legal." Wolf's eyes shifted to Emma. "But this child offers sympathy for our losses. This is not the behavior of murderers." Burning Sky said something sharp in Comanche, and Wolf replied in a tone that was gentle but firm. Emma got the feeling she was watching a grandfather explain something important to a beloved but stubborn grandson. "What did he say?" Emma asked Ayanna. "He asks why we should trust any white words when white soldiers and white gold men have brought nothing but death to his people." What did Wolf say back? "That wisdom comes from judging each person by their own actions, not by the color of their skin." Emma looked at Burning Sky, seeing past the war paint to the grief underneath. "When my mama died, I was angry at everybody. The doctor who couldn't save her, God for letting it happen. Even Papa and Benjamin for still being alive when she wasn't. I wanted to break things and hurt people because nothing felt fair." Burning Sky's dark eyes fixed on her face. "But hurting other people didn't make me miss Mama any less. It just made me feel worse about myself." Emma took another small step forward. Maybe if we helped each other instead of hurting each other, we'd all feel a little less lonely." 2 hours later, Emma Morrison was learning to braid a horse's mane while Burning Sky taught Benjamin how to make bird calls with his hands cupped just right. The transformation from Dawn's near violence to Morning's tentative friendship felt like magic. But Ayanna knew it was really something much rarer and more precious: the willingness of people to see past their fears and pain to find common ground. Wolf sat cross-legged on a buffalo hide outside the cabin, sharing jerky and wild plum cakes with Jacob, while they tried to piece together the truth about Tom Brewster's schemes. The old chief's English was better than he'd first let on, and his questions were sharp as arrow points. "This gold man, he comes to our young warriors 3 days past," Wolf explained, gesturing with a piece of jerky. "Says white farmers on Singing Creek have been raiding our horse herds. Says they killed 2 of our women gathering roots." Jacob's face went pale. "That's not true. We've never even seen any Comanche horses, and we certainly never hurt any of your women. I know this now. But young men with empty bellies and dead grandfathers do not always think with clear minds." Wolf glanced toward where Burning Sky was patiently showing Benjamin how to whistle like a meadowlark. "Especially when the gold man offers rifles and horses to any warrior brave enough to drive out the murderers. He's arming your people to attack us?" "He tries to. Most of our warriors are too wise to trust white gold. But some," Wolf shrugged, "some hurt too much to think straight." Ayanna looked up from where she was teaching Emma to weave grass into rope. "How many took his weapons?" 6, maybe 7. Young ones mostly. Boys trying to prove they are men. Wolf's weathered face showed worry. They ride south toward the big settlement, looking for the horse thieves and woman killers they believe live there. Oh no, Jacob breathed. The Henderson Ranch. The Williams place. Brewster's probably told them the same lies about every family in the valley. Worse, Wolf said grimly. He tells our young men that all whites in this territory are enemies, that any raid will be seen as justified revenge for our losses. Emma stopped braiding her horse's mane and looked at the adults with growing alarm. Are people going to get hurt? Not if we can help it, Ayanna said firmly. But she was thinking fast, trying to calculate distances and travel time. If Wolf was right about the young warriors heading south, they would reach the Henderson place by afternoon. The Williams family had 3 small children, and old Pete Kowalski lived alone with nothing but an ancient musket for protection. We have to warn them, Jacob said, standing up suddenly. Warning will not be enough, Wolf replied. Young warriors with new rifles and full hearts do not listen to white words. They must hear truth from people they trust. Then you'll go after them? I am too old to catch angry young men on fast horses. But Wolf looked thoughtfully at Burning Sky, who was now helping Benjamin stack small stones into careful piles. Perhaps one who shares their pain might speak words they would hear. Burning Sky looked up as if sensing the attention. Grandfather? Wolf switched to Comanche, speaking quickly and earnestly. Emma watched the young warrior's painted face change from confusion to understanding to something that might have been hope. He says I should ride south and tell the truth to our war party, Burning Sky translated for the others. Tell them the gold man's words are lies, meant to make us fight his battles for him. Will they listen to you? Jacob asked. Burning Sky was quiet for a moment, looking at Benjamin's careful stack of stones. They might. We grew up together, learned to hunt together. They know I would not lie to protect whites unless… He paused, searching for the right words. Unless what? Emma prompted. Unless these whites had shown me something worth protecting. The words hung in the morning air like morning mist, full of possibility and fragile as spider webs. Emma felt something shift in her chestnut, the fear she'd carried since Mama died, but something warmer and stronger. I'll go with him, she announced. Absolutely not, Jacob said immediately. Emma, you're 10 years old. You're not riding into danger. I'm not riding into danger. I'm riding to stop danger. Emma's chin jutted out with familiar Morrison stubbornness. Besides, if Burning Sky shows up alone, they might think he's been captured or threatened. But if I'm there too, choosing to come, it proves he's telling the truth about us being friends. Ayanna studied the girl's determined face. Your father is right. Too dangerous. More dangerous than letting innocent families get hurt when we could have stopped it? Emma looked around at all the adults. You said it yourself sometimes. Being brave means doing scary things to protect people. Wolf chuckled, a sound like wind through dry leaves. The child has warrior heart, rare in one so young. She has her mother's heart, Jacob said quietly. Margaret would have said the same thing. He was quiet for a long moment, wrestling with fears and memories and the terrible weight of making decisions that could cost him everything he had left. But I can't lose you too, sweetheart. You and Benjamin are all I have. Emma walked over and took her father's calloused hands in her small ones. Papa, you taught me that doing right is more important than staying safe. You could have sold our land to Mr. Brewster and kept us safe, but you didn't because it wouldn't have been right. That's different. No, it's not. It's exactly the same. Emma's voice carried the kind of certainty that only children and saints ever achieved. If we let bad things happen to good people when we could stop them, we're not really safe anyway. We're just scared. Burning Sky stood up from where he'd been playing with Benjamin. I will protect her with my life. That's what I'm afraid of, Jacob muttered. Ayanna rose gracefully and walked over to where Wolf sat on his buffalo hide. Honored grandfather, what do you think? Wolf was quiet for several heartbeats, his dark eyes studying Emma's face. I think, he said finally, that the spirits sometimes speak through the mouths of children because adults have forgotten how to hear truth clearly. He reached into a leather pouch at his belt and withdrew something small and bright, a pendant made from a piece of turquoise wrapped in silver wire. This belonged to my granddaughter, who died in the cold time 2 winters past. She was brave like this one, and stubborn like this one. He held out the pendant to Emma. Will you carry her spirit with you? Emma took the pendant with reverent hands. I'll take good care of it. I know you will, little warrior. Jacob's shoulders sagged in defeat. Margaret's going to haunt me forever if I let our daughter ride off with a Comanche war party. Not war party, Wolf corrected gently. Peace party. Very different thing. Tell me again how this is supposed to work. Ayana explained while she quickly gathered supplies for the journey water, dried meat, extra ammunition for her rifle. Burning Sky and Emma ride to catch up with young warriors before they reach settlements. When they see Emma there by choice, not as captive, they must listen to his words about Brewster's lies. And if they don't listen, then at least we tried to do right thing. Jacob watched his daughter check the straps on an old saddle, her movements careful and determined. She looked so much like Margaret in that moment, the same set to her jaw, the same refusal to back down when she believed in something. I want to go too, Benjamin announced from where he was still stacking stones. You're too little, baby brother, Emma said gently, but I'll be back before supper, I promise. Benjamin considered this. Will you bring me a pretty rock? The prettiest one I can find. Wolf stood and walked to where 4 Comanche ponies were tethered in the tall grass beyond the cabin. He spoke to them in low, musical tones, and a-spirited paint mare, with intelligent eyes, separated from the group and approached him. For the little warrior, he said, offering Emma the lead rope, Dancing Cloud is gentle but fast. She will carry you safely. Emma had never ridden a horse by herself, but she'd been watching Ayana and learning. She managed to mount without too much scrambling, and Dancing Cloud stood patient as stone while she found her balance. Burning Sky swung onto his own horse with fluid grace, then leaned over to speak quietly to Emma. Are you truly ready for this, white sister? Emma looked back at the cabin where Benjamin was waving at her father's worried face, at Ayana's proud smile. I'm ready. As the 2 young people rode south toward whatever waited in the rolling grassland, Wolf turned to Jacob with a thoughtful expression. Your daughter will do great things in this world. If she lives long enough, Jacob replied, watching until Emma and Burning Sky disappeared over a distant ridge. The bravest ones always live long enough to do what the spirits need them to do. Ayana touched Jacob's arm gently. She carries strong medicine now. Wolf's granddaughter's spirit will guard her. I hope spirits are tougher than they look, Jacob muttered, but he was smiling slightly as he said it. In the distance, thunder rumbled, not the sound of an approaching storm, but the drumming of many horses moving fast across hard ground. Tom Brewster was coming, and this time he wasn't planning to talk. The bullet that shattered the cabin's front window missed Benjamin Morrison's head by 3 inches. He was sitting on the floor playing with wooden blocks when the glass exploded inward, sending sharp pieces flying across the room like deadly snow. His surprised cry was drowned out by the thunder of horses and the whooping of men who'd spent too much time in saloons and not enough time thinking about consequences. Get down! Jacob shouted, diving to cover his son while Ayana rolled behind the heavy wooden table they used for meals. Wolf, moving with surprising speed for his age, pressed himself against the wall beside the broken window and peered carefully outside. 12 men, he reported in English. Maybe more coming from the north. Tom Brewster's voice carried clearly over the sound of stomping horses and jangling spurs. Morrison, you got exactly 1 minute to come out here and talk sense, or we're coming in after you. Jacob clutched Benjamin against his chest, feeling his little boy's heartbeat racing like a frightened bird's. Stay quiet, son. Stay very quiet. Ayana had crawled to where Wolf crouched and was studying the riders through a crack in the wooden shutters. Brewster brought more men than before. And they're not just cowboys, see the one with the badge? That's territorial law. Bought law, Wolf said grimly. I have seen this before. Another shot rang out, this one punching through the cabin's thick wooden door and embedding itself in the far wall. Benjamin whimpered and buried his face against his father's shoulder. 40 seconds, Morrison, Brewster called. Don't make this harder than it needs to be. Jacob looked around the small cabin that had been home for 2 years, at the quilt Margaret had sewn hanging on the wall, at the wooden cradle where Benjamin had slept as a baby, at the small shelf of books they'd brought from Missouri. Everything they'd built, everything they'd fought to keep it, could all be destroyed in the next few minutes. "What do they want?" he asked Ayanna. "Same thing they always wanted. You gone and your land empty." She checked the loads in her rifle. "Question is, how far are they willing to go to get it?" As if in answer, another voice joined Brewster's own that carried the flat authority of someone used to being obeyed. "This is Deputy Marshal Crawford. You're harboring hostile Indians and threatening the peace of this territory. Come out with your hands up, or we'll assume you're resisting lawful arrest." Wolf's weathered face showed grim understanding. Bought law speaks, bought words. Truth will not matter to such men. Jacob felt something cold settle in his stomach. If they had a real deputy marshal with them, even a corrupt one, any resistance could be called rebellion against territorial authority. That was the kind of charge that got whole families disappeared without trials or questions. 20 seconds. Brewster's voice was thick with anticipation. That's when Benjamin surprised everyone by wriggling out of his father's arms and toddling toward the broken window. "Emma!" he called loudly. "Emma, come home now!" "Benjamin, no!" Jacob lunged after his son, but the little boy was determined to look outside for his sister. Through the shattered glass, Benjamin's clear voice carried to the mounted men. "Where, Emma? Want Emma?" The shooting stopped. Even the horses seemed to quiet, as if everyone was trying to understand what they just heard. "Well, I'll be damned," someone said, not Brewster, but one of his men. "There's a little kid in there." Brewster's voice came back harder than before. "Don't matter if there's a whole orphanage in there, Pete. We got our orders." "Orders to shoot children?" The question came from Deputy Marshal Crawford, and there was something in his tone that hadn't been there before. Doubt, maybe, or the first stirring of conscience. "Orders to remove dangerous elements from this territory," Brewster replied quickly. "That includes anyone giving aid and comfort to hostile Indians." Inside the cabin, Wolf was listening to every word. "The lawman has honor buried somewhere beneath his gold love," he murmured to Ayanna. "Perhaps it can be awakened." Ayanna nodded and made a decision that surprised even her. She stood up, laid her rifle on the table, and walked to the broken door. "Don't," Jacob whispered. "They'll shoot you the moment you step outside." "No," she said with quiet certainty. "They will not shoot unarmed woman carrying child in front of bought lawman, who still remembers what honor means." Before anyone could stop her, she scooped Benjamin into her arms and opened the cabin door. The sight that greeted her was 12 mounted men arranged in a rough semicircle around the cabin, all with weapons drawn and ready. At their head sat Tom Brewster on a big bay stallion, his pale eyes glittering with triumph. Beside him was a thin man with a deputy's badge, who looked like he was having second thoughts about whatever he'd agreed to do. But it was Benjamin who commanded everyone's attention. The little boy looked around at all the horses and armed men with the fearless curiosity that only very young children possessed. "Pretty horses," he announced solemnly. "Emma likes horses too." Deputy Marshal Crawford lowered his pistol slightly. "Ma'am, are you being held against your will?" Ayanna shifted Benjamin to her hip and looked directly at the deputy. "I am guest in this house. These people are my friends." "Friends?" Brewster spat. "Lady, you're an Indian. They're whites. That ain't friendship, that's either captivity or treason. I know difference between captivity and kindness." Ayanna replied calmly. "This family feeds me at their table, asks my advice, treats me with respect. Your words show you know nothing of friendship." Benjamin reached out toward the nearest horse, a pretty mare with white markings. "Pet horse?" The cowboy riding the mare, a young man who couldn't be much older than 20, looked uncomfortable. "Ma'am, maybe you ought to take the boy inside. This ain't no place for children." "No place is safe for children when men choose violence over talking," Ayanna replied. She looked directly at Deputy Crawford. "You are lawman, yes? Your job is protecting innocent people?" Crawford's face was troubled. "Well, yes, but—" "Then look," Ayanna gestured toward the cabin. "You see fortress full of dangerous criminals, or you see home where man tries to raise his children in peace?" Through the broken window, Jacob could be seen holding the shattered frame where glass had cut his hands, trying to clear away the sharp pieces. Wolf sat calmly on the floor, his old bones too stiff to crouch behind furniture for long. "I see," Crawford said slowly. "A man who's been harboring hostile Indians in violation of territorial law. You see, man who gave food and shelter to hungry woman who helped his family survive." Ayanna's voice carried the kind of dignity that made even hardened men pause. "Is kindness to strangers now crime in your territory?" Brewster rode closer, his horse's hooves loud on the hard-packed earth. "Enough talk. Crawford, do your job or I'll find someone who will." But Deputy Crawford was studying the scene with new eyes. The broken glass, the bullet holes in the cabin walls, the frightened child in the Indian woman's armset didn't look like law enforcement. It looked like bullying. "Mr. Brewster," he said carefully, "when you said these folks were dangerous outlaws, you didn't mention there were small children involved. Children grow up to be adults. Adult problems require adult solutions." Benjamin chose that moment to reach out toward Brewster's horse, his small hand extended in the universal gesture of a child wanting to pet an animal. "Nice horsey?" Brewster jerked his reins back, making his stallion dance sideways. "Keep that kid away from my horse." The harshness in his voice made Benjamin's face crumple, and he started to cry, not the angry wail of a tantrum, but the heartbroken sobs of someone too young to understand why adults were being mean to him. "Shh, little warrior," Ayanna murmured, rocking him gently. "Some people forget how to see beauty in small things." Several of Brewster's men were looking uncomfortable now. Cowboys, even rough ones, usually had soft spots for children and horses. Watching a grown man frighten a toddler didn't sit well with their ideas of honor. "Tom," one of them said quietly, Maybe we should finish what we came to do." Brewster cut him off. "Crawford, I'm tired of waiting. Either arrest these people or I'll claim citizens' authority and handle this myself." Deputy Crawford looked around at the armed men, the crying child, the woman who stood calmly in the face of drawn guns. His badge felt heavy on his chest, heavier than it had when Brewster's gold first made it seem like easy money. "On what specific charges?" he asked. "Harboring hostile Indians, threatening the peace, resistance to lawful authority." Brewster's voice was getting louder, more impatient. "I need to see evidence of hostile actions. All I see is a woman holding a child. The evidence is that she's here, living with whites, learning our ways, probably gathering information for war parties." Ayanna looked at Deputy Crawford with steady, dark eyes. "I gather information about which plants heal fever, which roots can be stored for winter food, how to preserve meat so children do not go hungry. Very dangerous knowledge, yes?" Benjamin had stopped crying and was now playing with one of Ayanna's long braids, his small fingers gentle as he examined the colorful beads worked into the black hair. "Deputy," came a new voice from behind the semicircle of riders, "you might want to see this." Everyone turned to look as two more horses approached from the south. But these weren't more of Brewster's men. They were Emma Morrison and Burning Sky, riding hard and leading 4 other Comanche warriors behind them. Emma's hair was wild from riding, and her face was flushed with excitement and triumph. "Papa!" she called as soon as she was close enough. "We did it! We stopped them!" Jacob appeared in the cabin doorway, his relief at seeing his daughter alive so strong it nearly brought him to his knees. "Emma, thank God!" But Brewster was staring at the approaching Comanche warriors with pure hatred. "Perfect. Now we got a whole war party." "Not war party," called one of the warriors, a young man with red paint still streaking his cheeks. "Peace party. We come to speak truth about lies told by Goldman." Deputy Crawford's hand moved to his gun, but he didn't draw it. "What lies?" Emma rode up close to where Ayanna stood with Benjamin, her young face bright with the kind of joy that came from doing something brave and important. "Brewster told them we'd been stealing their horses and killing their women. None of it was true. He just wanted them to attack innocent families so he could buy up all the land cheap." "That's ridiculous," Brewster said, but his voice lacked conviction. Burning Sky rode forward and spoke directly to Deputy Crawford. "Goldman promises rifles and horses to warriors who drive out white families. Says all whites in Valley are enemies. But this child, He gestured toward Emma rides into danger to save both her people and ours from lies that would have made us kill innocents. The young warrior with red paint added, "We find white families to South Henderson's, Williams, Old Man Kowalski. None have stolen horses. None have harmed our women. All have been told same lies about Comanche raids that never happened." Deputy Crawford was looking more and more troubled. "Mr. Brewster, these are serious accusations." "Accusations from savages and children." Brewster's mask was slipping, showing the desperation underneath. "You gonna take their word over mine?" "I'm gonna take evidence over gold," Crawford said quietly. That's when Tom Brewster made his fatal mistake. Instead of trying to argue his way out of the situation, he reached for his gun. The shot that ended Tom Brewster's schemes didn't come from any of the 12 men he'd brought to drive the Morrison family from their land. It came from Emma Morrison herself, firing her father's old shotgun from the cabin window, where she'd positioned herself the moment she saw Brewster's hand move toward his weapon. The blast sent Brewster tumbling from his saddle, clutching a shoulder that would heal, but would never again have the strength to draw a gun fast. His bay stallion reared and wheeled, scattering the other mounted men, who suddenly found themselves looking at the wrong end of several Comanche bows and their own deputy marshal's drawn pistol. "Nobody else needs to get hurt here," Deputy Crawford said loudly, his weapon trained on the nearest of Brewster's men. "But the next person who reaches for a gun is going to answer to territorial law." Emma worked the shotgun's action with hands that shook only slightly, ejecting the spent shell and chambering a fresh one. "I learned to shoot rabbits with this gun," she called out through the broken window. "Rabbits are a lot smaller and faster than men on horseback." From the cabin doorway, Jacob Morrison stared at his daughter with a mixture of pride and shock. When had his little girl learned to handle weapons like a frontier woman? When had she grown brave enough to face down armed men without flinching? The answer, he realized, was gradually, day by day, lesson by lesson, under the patient teaching of a Comanche woman who understood that survival required both courage and skill. Ayanna still held Benjamin, but she had moved to where she could see the entire scene. "How many of Brewster's men will choose honor over gold?" she asked Wolf quietly. The old chief studied the faces of the mounted cowboys. Most are young and foolish, but not evil. They followed Brewster because he paid well and spoke confidently. Now they see his true nature. Indeed, several of Brewster's riders were already holstering their weapons and raising their hands. They'd signed on to intimidate a struggling farmer, not to shoot children or fight Comanche warriors who'd come in peace. "This ain't what you told us, Tom," said Pete, the cowboy with the scarred face. "You said these folks were dangerous outlaws. That little girl ain't dangerous to nobody but maybe jackrabbits." Brewster struggled to his feet, his left arm hanging useless and his face twisted with pain and rage. "You idiots don't understand what's at stake here. The railroad's coming. This land will be worth a fortune." "So that's what this was really about," Deputy Crawford said grimly. "Not Indian troubles or territorial security. Just greed." Burning Sky rode closer to where Brewster stood swaying. "Goldman pays warriors to attack innocent families, makes war between peoples who could live in peace. This is greatest dishonor." "I don't need lectures from savages," Brewster snarled. That was his second mistake. Wolf's grandson, the young warrior with red paint, had been listening quietly to the conversation while stringing a fresh arrow to his bow. Now he guided his horse forward until he was close enough to look down at Brewster from horseback. "My grandfather died fighting blue soldiers who broke promises and stole land," he said in careful English. "But you are worse than soldiers. They at least fought with courage. You hide behind lies and hire others to do your killing." Emma called out from the cabin window, "What happens to him now?" Deputy Crawford looked around at the assembled riders, warriors, and witnesses. "Well, we got attempted murder, conspiracy to incite violence between races, fraud in land dealings, and probably a dozen other charges. Mr. Brewster's going to be a guest of the territorial prison for a long time." "And our land?" Jacob asked, stepping fully out of the cabin now that the immediate danger had passed. "Your land papers are legal, Mr. Morrison. Whatever deals Brewster was trying to force won't hold up in any honest court. Crawford holstered his weapon. Though I'd recommend getting yourself a good lawyer to make sure all the titles are clear. Benjamin had been watching the entire confrontation with wide eyes, not understanding the adult conversations but sensing that something important was happening. Now he wiggled in Ayana's arms and pointed toward Emma in the window. "Emma Brave," he announced solemnly. Emma lowered the shotgun and grinned at her little brother. "I learned from the best teachers." She meant Ayana, of course, but also her father's quiet determination, her mother's fierce protectiveness, and even Burning Sky's willingness to risk everything to prevent innocent people from being hurt. As Deputy Crawford and two of the more honest cowboys took charge of the wounded Brewster, the rest of the men began dispersing. Some rode away immediately, probably hoping to find new jobs far from the mess they'd almost been part of. Others lingered, talking quietly among themselves about what they'd witnessed. Wolf dismounted from his horse and walked over to where Jacob stood. "Your daughter has strong medicine," he said solemnly. "She will be remembered in the stories my people tell their children." Jacob looked up at Emma, who was climbing down from the window with the shotgun still in her capable hands. "She's got her mother's heart and her grandfather's stubborn streak. I just hope she lives long enough to figure out what to do with both." Ayana set Benjamin down so he could run to his sister, then turned to face the small group of people who had somehow become her family. Question now is, what happens next? Winter still comes. Land still needs working. Children still need teaching. "Are you asking if you can stay?" Jacob said. "I am asking if you want me to stay." Emma had Benjamin on her hip now, carrying him the way she'd seen Ayana do. "Of course we want you to stay. You're part of our family now." "Family," Wolf repeated thoughtfully. "Good word. Sometimes family is people who share blood. Sometimes family is people who choose to stand together when standing apart would be easier." Burning Sky, who had been quietly tending to his horse, looked up at the conversation. "Honored grandfather, what of me? I have no band to return to, no place among the young warriors who still dream of counting coup." Wolf studied his grandson's painted face. "You have found something more valuable than coup, boy. You have found honor in protecting innocence and peace in choosing understanding over anger. These are the qualities of a true chief." "I'm not ready to be a chief." "No one ever is. That's what makes them good at it." Emma set Benjamin down and walked over to where the adults were talking. Could Burning Sky stay too? At least for the winter? Papa could use help with the heavy work, and he knows things about the land that even Ayana doesn't know. Jacob looked at the young Comanche warrior, seeing past the war paint to the intelligence and courage underneath. "Can you work a farm, fix fences, tend animals, harvest crops?" "I can learn," Burning Sky replied. "And I can teach tracking, hunting, how to read weather signs. Fair trade? More than fair." As the sun began to set over the Texas Panhandle, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson, an unlikely family gathered around the table in the Morrison cabin. Jacob and his children, Ayana Crowfeather, Burning Sky, and old Wolf, representatives of two peoples who had been enemies, now choosing to build something new together. Outside, the first winter winds were beginning to blow across the endless grassland. But inside, the fire burned warm and bright, and the conversation flowed between English and Comanche as naturally as water finding its course. Emma was teaching Benjamin to count in both languages, while Burning Sky showed Jacob how to repair the bullet damage to the cabin walls, using traditional techniques that would make them stronger than before. Ayana and Wolf worked together to plan the winter's food storage, combining her knowledge of preservation with his understanding of what the weather would bring. It wasn't the family any of them had been born to, but it was the family they had chosen. And as Margaret Morrison had always said, the things you choose for yourself are often more precious than the things that simply happen to you. When spring came, they would plant gardens using seeds from 3 different traditions. They would build additions to the cabin to house their growing household. They would welcome neighbors from both worlds, showing that peace was possible when people chose understanding over fear. But that was still months away. Tonight, there was food on the table, children's laughter echoing off the walls, and the quiet satisfaction of people who had faced danger together and emerged stronger. Outside, the wind carried the promise of snow. Inside, the fire burned bright with the warmth of family, the kind that transcends blood and survives any storm.